Hello, this is the Cat's Library and I will be your librarian today. In this week's video, I am going to continue my original story that I've been doing on this channel, and this is going to be part 1 of The City of the Sea Folk. So sit back, relax, and enjoy a story and a speed paint together today. Unlike the first time that the librarian had come to Catton Manor, this night tonight was clear and the stars were visible. The air was filled with the smell of dry grass and the crickets were having a concert. A whippoorwill called through the night as if heartbroken before the sound was ultimately swallowed up by the overwhelming ferocity of the pine forest. The librarian used her keys to get past the gate and into the house. She tiptoed past Mr. Halibut's door. He had been invited to the local codebreakers' headquarters to fill out some forms earlier that week, and he was equally as grumpy during the day, but she still didn't want to risk making him angry. She creaked one of the double doors open. The darkened hallway was filled with moonlight and the jagged shadows of the bookcases. Stray dust particles which Halibut had neglected sparkled in the air like confused fish. She creaked the door closed again and walked over to her chair, where she had left the journals on the first Planet A2 expedition team. A shadow flitted across the floor under her feet, and a low purring sound vibrated through the woodwork. She gritted her teeth and forced herself to ignore it. The cat would come to her when he was ready. The librarian sat down. She let the cat continue to purr, cleared her throat, and began to read. Alani stared unblinkingly at the ceiling of the hut that the forest people had given Saffron, Dahlia, and herself after she had dealt with Zell for them. A bright green spider crab crawled across Alani's field of vision. It burrowed into the twigs and plaster with its claws looking for wood aphids. She was lying in a pile of feathered down on the floor. Each of the girls had their own. Saffron was lying in her cot like a doll that someone had left lying around. She was nearly completely see-through and only reflected the feather down of the nest she was sleeping in. It was impossible to wake her up if she didn't want to. The spider crab found an aphid and pinched it in its mandibles. Alani pinched her eyelids together tightly and tried to shut out the image, but the thoughts swirling and flashing through her mind proved to be far too terrible, and so she reluctantly forced them back open. Dahlia had been going in and out of dreams and had been mumbling incoherently in her sleep all night. She was currently at war with the blankets as she kept kicking them wildly. It was probably because she had been separated from Ari, since Ambassador and Enemy had only provided the crew with 2 huts. Eventually, she kicked so hard that she rolled out of her nest and onto the floor. There was a painful-sounding thud, and the torrent of feathers fountained into the sky, disrupting the order of the quiet room. One of them floated aimlessly through the air before gently settling on Alani's nose. She didn't move. Dahlia groaned loudly and then pulled herself to her feet with a level of weariness only before seen in teenagers training to run a marathon without properly pacing themselves first, or new mothers. She limped over to the door frame and pushed back the elaborately embroidered curtain to see outside since the window was a bit tall. Dahlia jumped slightly when she found her teammates' Venus red eyes open and staring ahead, nearly lifeless. She waved her delicate hand in front of the half-human's field of vision and breathed a sigh of relief when her action was met with an annoyed blink. "Hey, Lonnie, you awake?" "No." "Great, can you help me get up Saffron?" "Fine." Out by the picnic table, Mike and Ari were already out there waiting for them. Ari was turning a spit over in a fire, cooking some of the salted bacon that they had brought with them so that it didn't go to waste. Mike was doing push-ups nearby with his bat on the table. "Hey, Ari," Mike said. "How about today we debate the existence of luck?" Ari readjusted some of the wood with his spare hand. "I think that's a little too metaphorically spicy for today. Maybe something lighter?" Right, like communism versus capitalism, Mike asked innocently. Ari let go of the spit and turned to stare his friend directly in the eye with a steely expression. No, stop joking about it. Hi, Ari, said Dahlia as the girls came up. Mike turned to face them and smiled, but Ari didn't stop his disapproving leer. Hey, doll, how'd you sleep? Fine. Her smile widened slightly, but her eyes stayed about the same. It was that bad, huh? Did you have that dream again? The smile instantly shrunk to something more akin to a strained smirk. I'll tell you later. She sat down. Mike sighed between reps. Okay, sorry for bringing it up. As long as you know what you've done, I'm happy. How about you guys debate whether the piano or violin is the best instrument? Dahlia suggested. Nah, we did that 2 weeks ago, said Mike. All the while this was happening, Alani was still lost in thought, and Saffron was watching her be lost in thought. The fearless leader shook herself out of it finally. What are you guys on about? Oh, Michael and I were contributing to our daily debate, Ari explained. Alani shifted her weight almost imperceptibly in the triple-pronged pine needles. Right, there's something... Why do you argue so often? Isn't it better for team building to try to agree about things? Mike rolled onto his back and raised his hand. Well, usually if the doctor here and I agree about something, we just sit in silence for half an hour until I suggest that we do something fun, and he suggests some sort of chemical crime against science. Explosions are really cool and not at all a crime against science. It makes more sense than playing water polo does. What do you even wear to something like that? A swimsuit, and a swimming pool is not inherently a weapon of destruction like blasting a diamond with TNT is. Is this too cliché to be our argument, or does it work? Well, given that we haven't had this particular debate in some time, I think it works. Dahlia gave a more real-looking smile. Mike began doing sit-ups. How long did you guys argue to try to decide what you're going to be arguing about? Saffron signed. An hour and 35 minutes. Mike whistled in an impressed sort of way. Alani cleared her throat. I'm gonna have to stop you right there because we need to go over the plan for the day. Everyone went quiet at the uncharacteristic seriousness of her words. When we get to the Sea Folk City, Mike and Dahlia, you take Harper to reunite with his dad. Ari and Saffron, you two go and try to find the library and scout out the more academic community to try to see what the situation with the Empire is. I have my own mission, and we will find a rendezvous point when we arrive. What's your mission? Asked Dahlia. Top secret, Alani replied matter-of-factly. Top hat secret or more of a baseball hat secret? Mike ventured. That doesn't mean anything because you clearly have the giggles this morning, and you should really play baseball since you reference it so much. Dahlia squinted her face at the blatant change of subject and shared a look with Mike, who was also concerned. That's what I said. Ari took the bacon off the flames and started placing it on the wood blocks that the forest people had provided them to use as plates. He goes on and on about baseball all the time, but doesn't play it. I have suggested that we play it multiple times, and you would always rather try to light a trail of gunpowder that leads to a bit of gasoline under a soda bottle to see if it can achieve liftoff, or however that's phrased. Alani stood up. Now that we're all in agreement about our missions, I'm going to confirm with Ambassador and Enemy. The Red Forest man, whom Alani had rescued yesterday, volunteered to drive the one truck in the village. An Enemy decided to let this other raccoon-gray soldier girl also join the group. She smiled at Red, even though his antler had been pruned, but he barely even looked at her in response. Their names were Raffi and Tayo. The car rattled as its treads on the poorly managed dirt road would hit a root once in a while, and half the team clutched their stomachs. Saffron grabbed at the seat around her in terror, but Alani didn't react at all. She had taken far more tumultuous rides before. A few hours later, the forest began to thin around them. The car turned a corner, and Tayo called to everyone to look ahead since she spoke English. Indeed, as they finished turning around the corner, a shining city greeted them from an island just off the coast. Large metal support beams connected the cylindrical skyscrapers to the surrounding cliffs and down into the water. Luckily, the city was in some sort of geographical sound, so it was majoritively surrounded by land and not at risk for a hurricane or typhoon or whatever storms from the adjoining oceans are called. Ari pointed out that it might be qualified as an inland sea because there was a massive electrical dam filling the strait out into the ocean. Flying boats sailed through the air and docked at the top of buildings. The tops of the cliffs were covered in sparkling plates with an unknown purpose, and also wind turbines. As they got closer, they heard calming music played from speakers on the buildings. On the side of the road, brightly colored billboards began advertising random products as the truck crawled down the slightly better maintained pavement. Tayo explained that the truck had been an old model of a flying boat before it had lost its hover capacity and had been rebuilt for forest people use back in the 50s. They finally came up to a large gate with a toll booth facing the driver's side seat. They looked up a ways into the gigantic black and white face of the operator, and she smiled at them with a mouth full to bursting with short, sharp teeth. She could have eaten one of the Earthlings in one bite. Luckily, she was very nice, let them in for cheap, and ran the ferry for them so that they got to the city cleanly and efficiently. Apparently, the suburbs of the Sea Kingdom were underwater, so it looked to the travelers as if they reached the city itself extraordinarily quickly. They all got roped into an all-expensive paid tour of the city, courtesy of the king. Alani asked a few questions about the king, mildly concerned, but seemed relieved after learning from the guide, who looked strangely similar to the fairy woman, was talking about a dragon. As his fearless leader relaxed, Mike grew all the more concerned. He hadn't forgotten the conversation that he had overheard with Alani and Zell yesterday, or at least the tone of voice of the conversation, and he figured that it must have something to do with the king, or at least a king, if that had been her reaction. He thought about hypnotizing her into telling him what was up, but figured that it might threaten the crowded populace and be seen as a sign of aggression. As they went through the tour, the group was peer pressured into buying a myriad of useless knickknacks they didn't need by trading half of everything in the pack and Saffron's left pinky toe. It was near never-ending stimulus of museums, a historic statue on every corner, and an absolutely gigantic statue of a sea dragon, which was curled around the central tower to denote it as the emperor's private residence, and the congregational building. There was different types of equally loud music, a bakery which exclusively served bread with sardines or grasshopper-looking organisms integrated as commonly as raisins, and a bunch of paperwork required to get them all on a holographically projected game show tomorrow night. 3 humans and a glassman weren't interesting enough to bump the set designer of the award-winning play of Fish and Dragons out of his slot. The tour guide gave a confusingly worded answer about why Alani wasn't interesting enough to be interviewed, which Alani herself seemed strangely okay with. After the tour was over, all the civilians who had been following around and darting away when the tour guide glared at them immediately swarmed the humans with a myriad of questions which Tayo, the forest woman, had a hard time keeping up with to translate. Eventually, the group managed to get away because a misty rain settled over the island, but found that Alani snuck off on her secret mission in the midst of the chaos. Mike sighed and pinched the bridge of his nose. And I was such a good mood this morning. We could still do our missions, Ori suggested. Do you think that Alani's up to something? Asked Dahlia. Saffron, do you know? They turned to see Saffron reading a signpost while hiding from the precipitation under a shop canopy. She noticed them looking at her and allowed the reflection of the lettering to be translated into English. She pointed to the one that read library. Ari nodded. Okay, I'll get Saffron out of the rain. Mike, you can do whatever. He gave Dahlia a quick kiss. You keep him safe, he joked while giving Mike a stern look, before smiling and heading toward Saffron, talking about trying to find an umbrella. The forest people looked concerned. Mike took his bat in his hands and admired it, slowly turning it around. How about you two follow after them? Tayo's brown eyes turned green, while Raffi just looked confused. Mike winced internally for forgetting that the young buck didn't speak English. Maybe we should follow after them, she repeated and then shook her head. Raffi cleared his throat and asked what she had just said. She explained something and wrapped her wing around him, leading toward Saffron and Ari. Raffi stiffened up at first, but very quickly relaxed and almost smiled to himself. So where do we go first to look for Harper's dad? Asked Dahlia. Like, comment, and subscribe if you know how to do those things, and share the video. Thank you for watching, and see you next week for City of the Sea Folk Part 2.